I've been here about 16, 17 months, so you know that I don't necessarily like to do things the same way, right? So we're going to throw you off a little bit this morning. So we're in Genesis 21. If you're joining us this morning, we've been walking through this character study in Genesis over Abraham's life. And we get to chapter 21 this morning, where we see God's faithfulness played out in Sarah and Abraham's life with the birth of Isaac. And the reality for Abraham and Sarah is that they struggled. There was an obstacle in front of them that said, the world said you can't have children. But a faithful God stepped in and intervened and said, watch this, right? And so I thought this morning that one of the best testimonies to God's faithfulness is for you to hear that firsthand of what God does. And so Ricky and Katy are going to share a little bit about their story, if you have never heard their story. And so they're going to share a little bit of their story this morning with you as we jump in. So you guys, come on.
Oh, I'll go first, I guess. Hey. So, we have been married for 13 years. We have 6 children. That was definitely not in our original plan. We were married for about 5 years whenever we were like, okay, sure, let's have some kids. Like when you're a new wife, though, it's like 3 minutes after you say I do, you're like, yeah, babies, let's do it, right? So the baby part, let's have a baby. Yeah, okay. So, and this is why they don't give me a microphone. So anyway, all that to say, we had talked long before about how we were going to adopt. We didn't know how that would look. Originally for me, growing up, I had followed Stephen Curtis Chapman and a couple other artists that, people that are influential that had done international adoption. That's where my heart was originally. And as we started kind of living adult life, we were 20 when we got married. We noticed that a lot of our friends in our community at our church were fostering. And so that kind of turned to where we decided that we would probably foster and adopt at some point in our marriage. But we thought, well, we'll have, our biological kids, we'll get our family set up, and then we'll foster and adopt, because I had that mentality of, well, I can't, you can't give me kids and then take them away. You can't do that to me, because I'll just die and I won't be able to handle it. It'll be too hard, so I can't do that. So let's have our biological kids, and then we can foster, and that way we can foster with more of an open heart. We don't have to be just like, this is our family, and cling on, because that's what I do. I cling. And so we decided that we would do that, and we were not able to have biological children. We went through fertility treatments, and we got to the last one, and I had made Ricky promise me from that point that once it got to the $25,000 level and the more intensive things that a lot of families do, we were 20 young kids. We didn't have $25,000. Our families were amazing and supported us through the treatments that we did do. And so we got our last negative result, and they said, you're going to have to do IVF. And even then, it's only a 25% chance that you're actually going to have a baby. And I had said, okay. And it was really hard, but I had made Ricky promise me that was not something that we were going to do. I said, I'm not going to pay $25,000 for a 25% chance when there's thousands and thousands and thousands of children that need homes and families to love them. And that's whenever I realized that God had set that in my heart so early before, because it was just the next thing to do. It was, okay, well, we're not going to have biological children. We knew we were going to adopt, so let's just grow our family that way. And it's fun to watch that provision. It wasn't easy at the time to make that decision, but we went into it full force that's what we were going to do. We were going to get licensed. We were going to, at the time, just straight adopt. So any children that were legally free for adoption, we would adopt. And so that's what we decided to do. And I mean, you know our story, but we had a little boy who we fostered, and we're supposed to adopt. We were told he'll be legally free by the end of the year. He'll be in your home. You'll adopt him. It'll be great. It'll be wonderful. Yes, you're going to get him. And went to court, and they said he's going back home. And that was we lost him, and he went back home. to a very unstable situation. It was really, really hard. But that's when God used that moment to tell me, Katie, you can survive because I am your strength. And so and at that point we decided to go ahead and open our home up to fostering emergency placements, which means they can be there anywhere from a few hours to your adoptive children eventually. And we were told it would be a month almost before we'd get any kind of call. And we were visiting the little boy because he was about to go home, and we got a call 2 days later for an emergency placement to go home at 11 o'clock and be at home by 11 p.m. because they were coming with who is now Emily Claire. We got her at a week old. We fostered her for a year and a half. And during that time, we also found out about 3 children that needed a home, 3 siblings that they were going to have to split them up if they didn't find a home. And we just felt like that's what we needed to do. So we put our names in for that, and we were given 3 children also to be in our home. So then we were a family of 6. We were like, hey, we're done. Family of 6, yippee! And just to look at God's provision through all of that, and to see how he fulfilled his purposes through that, and brought us this large family that we didn't know. I mean, we had a little starter home with 3 bedrooms. We had to sell it and move and get a bigger home to fit this family. And even then we were full up, and no room in the inn for us, done. So it was a wonderful, beautiful picture of how it's not always our plan. And yet God sets things in your heart so early on, just like he did, with Sarah and Abraham. God had made this promise to them. And obviously Sarah got a little impatient at one point, but we do that. And so it's beautiful though to watch God's just hand through it all and the timing of it all. I'll let you finish the story.
Yeah, so we adopted 4 kids. We had them for a couple years, and you all know that our family is not just a family of 6, but a family of 8. And despite infertility and despite some pretty serious struggles, I mean, we weren't able to have kids, and even adopting 4, and they're our kids. They're not adopted kids. They are ours, right? But I think there's still something placed in the heart of a family, especially a mother, that you want to have. I mean, you want to. That's God. That's the way we were created. And so we adopted 4 kids, and I told Brady this earlier. When we adopted them, it's much like the Christian walk. You become a Christian, and what's key about that is you immediately take on the name of Christ. You are a Christian, a little Christ. And the analogy there is when we adopt 4 kids, they become a Johnson. They take on our name. They are us. And God said, you have 4 kids who are yours. But that promise that I've made to all mankind is to see you be fruitful and multiply and give. And that's not something that happens for all people. And we acknowledge that we have a walk that in a story that there are some people that struggle with that and may never see it happen. But we are grateful that despite adopting 4 kids that we will love forever, he granted us 2 more. I don't say that every day, but most days. And so, as he asked us this earlier this week that we would do this, and I pray that you will just think on the fact that it's something that we will never forget and never take for granted, that just as he did with Abraham and Sarah, there's a promise that he makes to us of his faithfulness, that he will always be there with us. And whether there's being granted the gift of 2 more children, or there's just the reminder that he's faithful when something doesn't happen, he's always there with us. And in this case, we're going to see the very same story happen with Abraham and Sarah. And wherever you are in your life, God is always faithful. And we're just thankful that we have a story that we get to share. And and for you guys and your support and just everything that Brady's, it's just a unique story that we have. And so we appreciate the opportunity to share it. So anyway.
Anytime that we can see God's word played out in front of us, it makes it even more real, right? Our aim is simply this morning, in light of what you have heard with Ricky and Katy and walking through infertility and walking through adoption and all of this, is our aim is simply this morning. God's faithfulness is not hindered by our perceived obstacles. Listen and hear that, okay? God's faithfulness is not hindered by our perceived obstacles. Obstacles for most of us are just that. They're perceived, aren't they? We think they are enormous, and we can't see on the other side of them, but we serve an incredibly mighty big God, right? So in Genesis chapter 21, starting in verse 1, it says this: "The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised." There's so much goodness in that verse alone. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, he's faithful, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised, he is faithful. Right? Verse 2, "And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him." He is faithful. Right? Verse 3, "Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him." Remember, we talked about the covenant last week that Abraham and God made, right? This was a sign of the covenant. Verse 5, "And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, 'God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me.' And she said, 'Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age.'" What a story that plays out. And we've had the privilege over the last few weeks of walking and seeing how God called Abraham and God promised to Abraham, "I'm going to make you a father of many nations." And we have seen this story unfold, and we've seen Abraham on this journey with God. And yet this whole time, okay, from the time that God calls Abraham to this moment when Isaac is born is 25 years. 25 years that Abraham and Sarah have held on to a promise from God. 25 years of just waiting. And how many of you have waited 25 years for anything? Yeah, that's right. Because why? We live in an instant culture, don't we? Give me. If I want it, I should have it now. Right? We go to a restaurant, and if they're just a little too slow, what is going on? My glass is half empty. What is happening? Right? We live in this culture that we should have everything now, but yet God does some incredible things in the waiting, doesn't he? Like God does some incredible things in our waiting. Even when we don't understand it, he does it. Because the whole time, God is revealing to Abraham a little more of who he is. And reminding Abraham over and over, "I am faithful, Abraham. I promise this and I will do it." And he does that. And so this morning, first we see what I would say most of us see our obstacles before we see the faithfulness of God. Right? We tend to, in our life, see our obstacles before we see anything else. And it may be an obstacle of infertility. It may be an obstacle where it's a medical diagnosis and you're like, we can't see beyond this. And it hurts and it's hard and it's difficult. You may see an obstacle in your life that's financial and you say, "I don't know any way out of this." And it's tough and it's hard. And look, here's the deal. Sarah didn't see any way out of her obstacle, did she? Sarah has known that God had promised this, but what does Sarah do? Katy mentioned it a while ago, didn't she? What does Sarah do? She gets impatient and does what? You can talk. It's okay. She tries to fix it herself, doesn't she? She gets Hagar and says, oh, Abraham, this is how you're going to have a son. It's going to fulfill God's promise. She took things in her own hands and tried to manipulate the promise of God. Because the obstacle for her was that she couldn't have kids. And in her world and in her culture, that meant everything. So the obstacle was huge. It was all that she could see was that she could not bear children for her husband. Whatever your obstacle is this morning, okay? Listen, you've got to hear this morning. Whatever your obstacle is this morning, whether it's a medical diagnosis, whether it's financial, whether it's relational, whatever the obstacle is this morning for you, let me tell you this. Let me be very clear. Your obstacle does not define the faithfulness of God. Whatever happens with your obstacle, whether it's removed, whether you get on the other side, or whether that obstacle is life-ending for you, it does not define the faithfulness of God. And we have to hold on to that theological truth because so many times we allow the obstacle that's in front of us to define the character and nature of God. Well, because God didn't do this, this is who he is. Because God didn't do this, then that means this is who he is. And we do that over and over and over again. And it paints this false picture of who God is. Listen, I'm going to give you a real brief illustration of that. When I was growing up, a little lad, I was never really little, but that's another story. So when I was young, okay, I was about 7, 8 years old. We had mud birds. Anybody know what a mud bird is? Has an orange belly, and they make their nests out of mud. We had mud birds that would make their nests underneath our front porch. And I had a BB gun. And I was a little boy. And I lived on 28,000 acres. So guess what I did? Pretty much any day that I was home, I had a BB gun, and I shot birds. I know, horrible person that I am. Listen, that's just what I did, right? And so I shot a mud bird. It's like, yeah, I got them. They won't make a mess on our front porch. That afternoon, one of our dogs got bit by a rattlesnake and died. I, in my 7-year-old mind, correlated the circumstance of me killing a mud bird and my dog dying as I shot a mud bird and God was punishing me by taking my dog away. That's what I did in my 7-year-old mind. I correlated one with the other, right? I had enough knowledge about God that he was righteous and that he was holy and that he did this. That was what was going on in my mind. That's a false belief about God. Because whatever obstacle I was facing, in this point, my dog dying, right, was correlated with something that I had done. So it defined God, that God was going to punish me and punish what I had done by doing something against me. And the reality is that is so far from the truth about the character and nature of God. Because God is not interested in punishing me, because what he did on the cross is he punished all of my sin. When he put Jesus on the cross and he hung there and he died, all of my sin was put on the cross. That's who God is. But he didn't stay on that cross, did he? He got put in a tomb, and 3 days later he rose again so that he would conquer death for me. That's who God is. So here's the reality for you and I. Whatever your obstacle is, it doesn't define the faithfulness of God. Whatever your obstacle is, he's still faithful. Whatever your obstacle is, he's still good. Whatever your obstacle is, he's still kind. He's still patient. He's still sovereign. He's still God. Your obstacle doesn't define the character and the nature of God. And then we see this. We see his faithfulness in the text. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. Come on. God promised it, and then he does it. And Sarah even says in verse 7, and she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. 25 years after God calls Abraham, he says, here it is, Abraham. Here's your son Isaac, who I promised to you. And what's interesting about this text is that it's kind of a blip in the overall story. Like you read Abraham's story and there's these 7 verses that are like, boop, Isaac was born, and we move on, right? And so the question is why? Why was it just so short that Isaac was born? Because Isaac is what? He's the promise that God had said, hey, here's your son Isaac, right? And we're going to see next week what God calls Abraham to do with Isaac, and that's gut-wrenching and powerful all in the same instance. But listen, there's just a little brief moment where God's like, oh, Isaac's born. God did what he said, and we move on. And so the question is, why wasn't it a much larger deal? Why wasn't it a larger deal? Because of this. And I read this week, and I was like, man, this is incredible. Listen to this. Part of the reason that scholars believe that it's not made such a big deal out of Isaac's birth is this, is that it was expected that God was faithful. It was just expected that God was going to do what he said he was going to do. So Isaac being born was like, yep, we all knew it. We all knew God was going to do that. Man. So what? And so then that hit me and punched me in the gut and slapped me over the head all at one time of going, man. Oh, that our faith would be that, church. That we would believe the promises of God. That we would believe that he's that faithful that when something happens that's a miracle in our books, we go, that's just God. That we would see it so often in our lives and we would believe it so much in our lives that when God does something so earth-shattering as to remove the obstacle in our life, if he so sees fit, that we sit there and go, that's just God. That's just who he is. Because we are so close to him that we know and trust the nature and character of God. Knowing that our obstacles don't hinder his faithfulness. Man, what a faith that would be for you and me. To trust in God that much. And so this morning I want us to be reminded of this week as we go about our life and as maybe we face some obstacles this week. Maybe right now in your own heart you are dealing with some things that you know are some pretty massive obstacles. And they're overwhelming emotionally and they're overwhelming in a lot of different ways. Can I tell you this morning that whatever obstacle you face doesn't define the faithfulness of God. That he is faithful because of who he is. He is faithful because of his character. He's faithful because he is God. His faithfulness is not hindered by our perceived obstacles, by the thing we think that cannot be moved. His faithfulness is still true. And so this morning, I don't know where you're at, but I invite you just to, before the Lord this morning, in our invitation in just a moment, just before the Lord, Lord, I want to trust your faithfulness. Maybe you're in a really good season of life right now and there's not a ton of obstacles going on. Maybe you just need to say in this moment, Lord, you are faithful. And I want to hold on to that, and I want to cling to that always. I want to cling to your faithfulness. Maybe that's where you're at this morning. We're going to pray, and then we're going to stand, and we're going to have a moment of invitation. We're going to invite you to come. I'll be down front. Our prayer partners will be down front for you. If you say, hey, I need to pray, we would love to do that with you. If this morning you say, hey, I have never put my trust and my faith in Jesus fully, we would love to have that conversation with you. And if you say this morning, hey, I want to make Oak Grove my church home, we would love to welcome you in that. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you this morning for your word. Thank you, God, that regardless of our circumstances, God, you alone are faithful. God, you always prove yourself because that's just who you are, God. And Father, pray in this room even now for those that are dealing with obstacles, for those that just needed the reminder this morning that you are faithful and that you are good. Father, for all of us in the room, we hold on and cling to your promises, that you are good, that you are kind, that you are patient, that you are slow to anger, that you are abounding in steadfast love, that all these things are true about you. God, be with us in this time. In your name we pray. Amen.